Okay, with it now being 3:10, we'll get started. The webinar is due to run up until 4:30 this afternoon, so we've got about an hour and 20 minutes to run through to try and get you started and up to speed with using the product moving forward. If you do have any questions, with this being a webinar platform, obviously all attendees are going to be muted as standard. We do have the question box, so please feel free to enter into there whenever you feel necessary or needed, and we'll cover them off either as we go through the presentation or towards the end, and we'll answer them in bulk, depending on obviously the content of what the question is actually referring to. So, as the first slide rightly states, this is a training webinar, so it's slightly more in depth to our normal daily demonstrations that we offer pre-sales. Obviously, this is now only invited or sent out to current owners of the Dataflow mapping tool itself. So what we're going to cover off today is going to be an introduction to the tool itself, how you're going to access the tool, user management, so how you can dynamically change who has access and also to what level of access they're going to have to the portal. We're then going to go through a more in-depth process mapping exercise, and that's actually going to be using the tool itself. We'll then cover off the final outcome, which is ultimately the report, and then, as I mentioned, towards the end of the webinar, we'll then cover off any questions and obviously do our best to answer them whilst we're live on the demo today. So, an introduction. The definition of data flow map, obviously this might be teaching people to suck eggs at this stage, obviously with the the EU GDPR now being in force for nearly 2 months, but just to cover off some of the key elements, the definition of a data flow map is essentially a diagram of how personal data flows through a given process and is transferred from asset to asset within an organization. The data flow mapping tool was essentially designed to simplify the process of creating these flow maps, which will help you meet the terms of the EU General Data Protection Regulation, more commonly known as the GDPR. Organisations should have been and are also encouraged to continue to be looking to create a data flow maps for all of their existing processes ahead of the GDPR compliance deadline, and obviously after that point as well. And the Cyber Compliance and online cyber security and compliance platform, which Vigilant Software created and hosts our portfolio of products on. And it's a host of a number of integrated tools, including our compliance manager, the data flow mapping tool, and we have a few up and coming projects that are due to go live on there shortly as well. In order to create an accurate data flow map of each process, you need to know these following things within your business. What every step of the process actually is. So this may involve you going around the individual departments of your company and doing almost a fact-finding mission to find out what sort of assets they're dealing with. Then it'll be a matter of finding out who carries out each step, and then finally, as I mentioned a second ago, what assets are used to do this. So using the tool itself, essentially we wanted to build something that wasn't going to bog organizations down in administration work. So we've designed it to be easy to use straight off the bat. So the data flow mapping tool is essentially built to simplify how your map data flows, giving you more time to spend on actually identifying and resolving data protection issues within your own business as well. It's also built for repeatability, so again, touching on the easy to use and to help mitigate the amount of time you're going to have to spend on this sort of area. The data flow maps created with the local tool, with the tool, can be easily reviewed, edited, and updated by multiple people as your organisation evolves. This is something we are going to touch on a little bit later on in the webinar, where we're going to show you again how you can dynamically change the users and the level of access they have. And then finally, logs personal data items. So it will generate an inventory of personal data, specifying what the lawful basis is, the types of personal data, and finally the categories of the data subjects themselves. A couple more points that it's going to be able to do for you is it will generate a data flow report, and these reports were helped in design by a group of GDPR consultants that we also work with closely, so we can obviously ensure that the content of what the report is going to be able to produce is going to be not necessarily used for auditing purposes, but could be accepted in maybe an internal audit or by an external assessor at any given point. So they are version controlled by date stamping each time you run the report. And also it will compile all of the information from the map that you're going to be creating within the tool itself. It embeds data protection by design, so the tool is essential for organizations seeking to embed data protection by design and by default into their processes. And then finally, it gives optional access to security controls. So not only is the data flow mapping tool part of the Cyber Comply portal, we also have our compliance manager that this will integrate with seamlessly. On here, you can record what security controls have been applied to a process and keep track of whether the process is governed by specific regulatory, statutory, and/or contractual requirements. So this will give you access into areas such as ISO 27001 if that's something you're certified or accredited against, and then also more recently the GDPR and also UK laws as well are available on that section. So user management, this is one of the more common questions that we receive. User management, how many can you actually have? So when you first make the purchase for the data flow mapping tool, you will receive 5 users as standard. As it mentions on the screen here, these can be built upon in blocks of 5, and obviously we do see some of our current customers and partners wanting to expand this, not necessarily in one great big lump to start off with. They can do it on a very granular, very incremental increase if they wanted to, so do 5, 10, 15, 20, as opposed to saying we definitely need 50 users. It completely depends on your business needs. Also, with those 5 users, if you know you're going to only ever need 5 people at any time using the product, what you can do is essentially archive a user. It frees up that person's access, so you can then administer that to somebody else within the organization or to an external body, maybe if you're using a consulting firm or a separate legal body entirely. So the setup is going to be to log into Cyber Comply. We're going to navigate to the data mapping tool, clicking the button on the home page to set up a business process you want to map. So we're going to now move into the tool itself. Some of these points on the screen is something we're actually going to cover as we go through using the data flow mapping tool through the Cyber Comply portal. So now just going to switch screens into that side. So that should have now switched over to welcome to Cyber Comply again. With yourselves all being essentially customers of the product, you should have already seen this screen as well. So as soon as you log on to Cyber Comply, at the moment we have the compliance manager and the data flow mapping tool. And again, like I mentioned, we do have a couple of ongoing projects to expand upon this over the next couple of months. At the top left side of the screen here, if you do own both parts of this portal, so the compliance manager as well as the data flow mapping tool, there's a quick way to jump between the two or simply return yourself back to the dashboard. Over here, you'll have the name of the portal. So you can see here it's Vigilant Demo and then my name. Obviously, yours will be specific to your own business. You'll have your request assistance button, which automatically opens up a ticket within our support system here, where we can log any feedback from yourselves, and also we will come back to you within a 24-hour period with any assistance you may require immediately, or if it's something you've reported an issue with the tool, it's a way that we can communicate back to you to let you know that we have taken it on board, it's now being looked into, and obviously keep an ongoing dialogue with yourselves with the progress as to how the fix or improvement is coming along. Over here on the far right hand side, you'll have an icon. Yours might look slightly different to mine, but below here, just by simply hovering on this, you've got another area where you can request assistance. You'll have your user details. This area allows the person who's currently logged into the tool itself to modify things like their phone number. They may want to change their email address, etc. Below there, you'll have your account summary. Now we are going to have a quick look in here. And just bear in mind the email addresses that we use in our throwaway emails, so they're just purely used to create these demonstrations. So at the top here, you'll have your organization details, which can be edited by yourself. You'll then have what purchases relate to your product. Below there, you'll then have the users. This is where you'll have the 5 users available to you when you first set up. Below there, you'll then have your profile. And going back to the user profile that we were talking about a moment ago, to add a user, all you simply need to do is select the plus button, enter in their email address, and then choose what role they'll actually have within your portal. So for anybody who has purchased the tool, we would typically set them up as an organization administrator, and that gives them full access and full admin rights over the entire system itself. So they can add, remove users, they can work on process maps, they can remove and add assets to their system, and so on. A contributor will give them a slightly skimmed milk type of access, so they'll be able to access certain areas such as the process maps themselves. They're not able to actually modify in the way of removing or adding new assets to the system, and they also don't have any access into the admin area that we're currently looking at. That is typically used if you are working with an external consulting body or legal body. You might want to just add them as a contributor without obviously giving them access to your backend system. If you do want somebody just to simply be able to log on and view the process maps, again, just as a referencing tool, you can invite them on a read-only basis. That doesn't give them access to any of the tools within the process map. Whilst they can view it, they can't change any of its content. And then finally, you have revoke. So if you are working with a consultant body or legal team, if you want to grant them access, but you know you only need them within your system within like 2 or 3 days, for example, whilst they're on site, you can simply revoke their access. It blocks them from logging into your portal, but also you can then re-enable their access again when they're either back on site or you require their services again. So we'll cancel out of here. Now there's a couple of additional points on here as well. If we select on edit, this will take us into another screen, so we can always come in here and change our role. If we return back out of this section, if we select on my name itself, this is an area that has been modified. So whilst you've still got the normal areas of changing your password information, you can change or view your active sessions. At the bottom here, this is more from a consultant standpoint. So I believe this might appeal more to yourself, Michael, one of the attendees we have on the webinar, where you will be able to view all of the accounts and essentially your clients or customers that you currently have access to, or which ones you do have access to, but they've chosen to revoke your ability to access until you're on site with them again. It will then give you a status as to which one you're currently accessing, and obviously on the left-hand side, you'll have a list of the company names. If you wish to remove yourself from their account, and then finally there'll be an access now button here to then switch between accounts individually, and it saves you having to create a number of different email addresses, which used to be a slight setback before this update was released onto the tool itself. So again, we will just come out of this section and we'll just return back to our account summary, and this will bring us back onto here. Towards the end of the yearly subscription, obviously these will turn into a zero counter, and obviously you can then select on the purchase more, buy more services down here, or alternatively contact us to renew your subscription again. So that is account summary. The next tab we're going to move on into is going to be the settings menu. Now, this is something that we would encourage you to do before you start creating your maps to start with. Essentially, this is where you're going to start building up your own custom classifications or removing classification fields that you know you're not going to be using as a company. So the 4 you'll have included to, or that are going to be set up for you before you get started, will be confidential, private, public, and restricted. If you know that any part of your business does at any point not have any publicly available records, you can simply toggle it off here, or even just remove it entirely from your Cyber Comply portal. Down the bottom here, we've added in some additional ones such as sensitive or highly restrictive, and these are free text boxes. You can modify these all you wish. It is completely free text if you want to. To add a new classification, you simply click on the Add New Classification field here. It will create a new area, you type it in, hit save, and then it becomes available to you when you're adding records to assets, essentially where they're going to be storing and how they're storing your data. The next one we're going to move on to are custom regions. Now, we've just got some placeholder points on here just to illustrate what this area is really used for. So the first example we've used is we store a lot of our data, for example, in the cloud, so it's a Microsoft Azure location, but we know specifically it's either their Western Europe or their island-based data centers. You can specify that just by putting in a custom location field at the top here, and then you'd still need to choose, obviously, what country that this information is going to be stored in overall anyway. So you'd still have Ireland EEA as the underlying location, which is also the example we use below here. So we've marked Kansas as the location, and it's just so we can be slightly more specific, even for our own internal notes, to keep track as to where the information is being stored, especially in a larger state such as America. So we can just make that a little bit more clear if we needed to. And then finally below here, so contact details for process records. So at the top here, this is going to be information that if you do have a data protection officer, or if you have your own in-house compliance team, you'll enter in all this information here. You'll use it as a registered address, as a contact address, so that each time you create a new process and you are acting as a controller in that particular instance, you would then just select it from the drop down. You'll then have an area where you can enter in your data protection officer's details, and then finally a representative of your business can be entered down here as well. You can choose to remove these at any point if you want to, so it won't be an option you'll be asked to enter in later on. So with all that mentioned, we're going to return back to our dashboard now, and we're going to move on into the data flow tool itself. So again, for a lot of you that may have been using the tool a lot since purchase, or you're just starting to get to grips with this, some of this might look quite reminiscent of some of the demonstrations we do. Within the webinars, we just try to include some of the new key elements, which was mainly that consultancy access we were looking at a moment ago under the user section. So at the top here, whilst we're looking in the process section, you'll have the ability to search any of your pre-existing process maps. You'll have a pie chart here, which is just a very top level view to indicate your status within your process maps themselves. So how many are you seen to be a controller within, how many are you a processor of, and how many are you simply a third party of. The next option on here will just be a help and tips section. So if you're just wanting to introduce new users to the tool, you can just help them familiarize themselves using these bulb icons throughout the tool itself. And this will also give you access to manuals as well. The next area that you'll come to is the drop-down section at the top here. So if you only have access to the data flow mapping tool, which obviously this is what this webinar is mainly focused on, the two areas you'll have the ability to go into will be organization assets and organization processes. These middle sections here for ISMS controls, legal and contractual, that is part of our compliance manager. We do hold weekly demonstrations of that, so obviously do feel free to book yourselves onto it if you want to familiarize yourself with it. But these are essentially where you'll gain access to the full EU GDPR regulation set, all of the UK laws. You'll have access to the ISA controls that you can see on the screen, and there's also the ability to upload your own internal regulations, controls, and also organisation contracts along that as well. So the area we're going to be focusing on to start with is going to be organisation assets. So beforehand, the way you'd add an asset to the system would be whilst you're inside the mapping process itself. Now we have created a new area, which some of you may be familiar with, some of you may not be, where you can create your assets before you even start that mapping process. So at the top here, we've got create new. It'll ask you to assign the asset type, so what you actually see this as within your business, be it a local storage, removable media, a web application, etc. You'll then be asked to give it its reference, or what you actually call it within your organization. The operator of it, so is this asset a controller of your data, is it simply a processor, etc. And then finally, you'll have a drop down of the locations to where this is going to be stored. So at the top here, you'll notice that this is slightly out of formation to the rest of the list in alphabetical order. And what this is going to do, again, just in that repeatability side, it's going to keep picking out the more commonly used locations. And what you'll see next to each one of these is also its status, whether it's EEA, non-EEA, or whether there's been an EC adequacy decision made against the state. So we'll cancel out of here. We're going to have a quick look now at our desktop. So the desktop, sorry, bad example. The one we're going to be using is going to be Marketing CRM UK. So what we can see here is we've already assigned this to be an asset type of a cloud application. We've then got a number of records that are going to be stored in this, and obviously this information is only going to become populated over time when you've started using it in maps and obviously indicating what records are going to be stored. The next point is going to be the operator, so whether it's a controller, processor, third party, etc. And then finally the location, so United Kingdom, EEA. Below these, we'll have 6 additional tabs where, again, we can touch on if there's any related controls in place against this particular asset, if there's any related legal requirements, if we have any tasks that are assigned to any of the users of the data flow mapping tool, which processes this one is currently being used within, any messages that we are choosing to leave to each other, and it also doubles up as an audit trail, so it will just keep track if there's been any changes made to it and which user has made that change. If we wish to add a comment, we can do so under here, and comments will not be published onto any form of report. They're simply for internal use only. So just see this as a free text area to leave notes to each other as you're working through this process. And then finally on here, if you want to show a relationship to another asset within the organization, you can do so. Just select on the associate asset and then choose from your existing list like so. If you do want to, or if you do already have a pre-existing asset register list, you can import this in bulk using our Excel template here. So what you'd need to do is you can download the Excel template so all of the headers are correct. What you will then be asked to do is just populate it with the relevant information that you saw in those drop downs when creating a new one, and then obviously just drag and drop that same file back up into the system, and it should only take a matter of seconds, if not a minute, to upload itself and display as it is doing on screen. Here in the background, so you'll see your list of assets. Now, if you do have any issues with this, what we do ask, if you just send us across as an example, import asset library, we will then pick out where the small error may have occurred. It could even be something as small as a comma inside one of these fields, and obviously we'll then just feed back what needs to be corrected. Over here on the right hand side, you've got the ability to delete an asset. Deleting an asset will obviously have an impact across all of the process maps that it's being used in, so please be sure that you are wanting to complete that action before moving any further forward. You've got the ability to edit an asset, so it's not set in stone once you've done it, but please note again, this is a global change, so if you change the name of an asset that's already being used in a process group, it is then going to have a change within that map, and obviously you'll then need to go through and run reports again given that change. And then we have close all, but what this one, or just close it off and pop it back onto the left-hand side attributes panel. At the top here, if you want to run a report against your asset list, you can do so just by clicking on here. It will then just give you a brief breakdown as to the key information that's going to be relating to this particular asset. And again, we've got that issue date at the top here, just so you've got a way of keeping a track of your records. Next to there, if you want to have a quick search in here as well, it's over here on the right hand side, and again we've got that drop down area for new users to familiarise themselves with what particular section they're looking at this given moment. So that was organisation assets, and we're now going to move on into organisation processes. So this will return us back to the home screen page. Now on here, we've got a large button at the top here, which will encourage yourselves to start or create a new process group. And then below there, we've got, a new process map. And then below there, we have our process groups. Now, we've kept ours nice and simple. We just have process, live demo, and then sales, web sales. Yours, as standard, when you first launch it out of the box, so to speak, will be completely blank, and it will require you to go through and obviously start populating this information over time. So what we're going to do is select on Create New. This will then take you to an area where it allows you to assign it to an existing process group. Process groups can be used in a number of manners. If you're a large business, you might want to break them down into subsidiaries, or if you're just a normal or an SME size organization, you might want to just simply break it down to the departments such as finance, human resource, sales, customer service, etc. If we use the drop down here, we can choose an existing group. And if you want to start a new group entirely, create a new one here, you'll be asked to give the group a name, subtitle, and description. Hit save, and then it becomes available in that drop down for you to choose to then progress further on into creating the process itself. So we're going to choose sales and then move along into where we're going to be creating or adding our new process. So you'll be asked to start with to assign a name or a title to this process. As a quick caveat to that, you can always come back into these and modify at a later point. And whatever you set here is not completely in stone. You can always make changes as the process may evolve over time, or as you find out a little bit more information from other bodies that may be involved within the process. The next section you'll be asked to complete is who the process owner is of this particular process within the company. You'll then be able to assign what they are acting as, so whether they're a controller, joint processor, and this is what your business is acting as within this particular process. So if we select controller, you don't then need to outline any additional information. If, however, you are going to be seen as a processor, you'll then need to enter in all of the controller's contact details. If there's any additional representative on from their side that you'll need to keep track of. And then once you've populated this information, you'll then be asked to give the process the scope, the purpose, and then finally, if you have any technical and organizational security measures in place against that process map. So we will cancel out of here as we are going to use the one that we've created before. Just to give you a run through, the particular one we're going to be going through is a sales process. So some of you may have seen this before. We're just going to go in a little bit more detail on this during the training webinars. So as you can see, if you had clicked save on that particular process group, it would have then popped it into the process group that you would have chosen. So we chose to put it into our sales group, and then you'll see it listed down here at the very bottom. So once we select on here, if we expand on the top section, it will give you the owner of the group or the owner of the process. It will then give you the scope. It will then outline the purpose of this process, any technical and organizational security measures in place. So this is everything that we've been populating in the previous screen. You'll then be asked to mark what we are acting as. We're actually seen as a processor in this scenario, and then we've then been asked to enter in the controller's contact details, and then obviously the representative contact details as well. So if we come back up the top here, now just to run through these 6 items here, these do differ ever so slightly to what you would have seen in the organization asset screen. Dropping down on each one, we do already have some placeholders, so don't look too much into which ones we've chosen. They're there simply as a illustration purposes only. So if we now select on the I button on each one of these, it will give you a brief description as to what that control is, what its reference is within that particular annex, and then finally its status. If you do have access to the compliance manager, this screen will also look familiar in the fact that you can mark your implementation status of a control, so whether it's selected and planned, whether it's selected and implemented, whether you're choosing to exclude it, or whether it's not even considered at this time. Within the Compliance Manager, again, just to briefly touch on that, you will be able to view full implementation guidance. You will then also be able to see the requirements of individual controls and also legal requirements. And there's also additional areas in there that you can mark to, again, your implementation or whether you're compliant with the regulation piece, and also ability to access into the full source documentation of the original article itself. So we'll close out of here. To add a new control to this section, we simply click Add Control. It will give you a list of all of the ISO 27001, both 2013 and 2005. And there's also a filter box up here if you know exactly what the reference of the control is you're looking for. We move then on into our related legal requirements. This is going to work in exactly the same way as we saw with the controls. However, this time if we select on here and add a legal requirement, the first area it's going to bring you to is going to be UK law, like so. If we use the I button again, we can see here exactly the description of that particular regulation. So if we were looking at GDPR, it would be outlined in this exact same manner, its reference, its status, and then finally down here, you've got these tick boxes to mark your compliancy, so whether you're compliant, non-compliant, excluded, not applicable, or finally not considered, which is what it will be as standard when you first use it. If you don't have the compliance manager in conjunction with the data flow mapping tool, this entire area down the bottom right hand corner won't be visible to you. It only becomes visible if you purchase the bundle or if you later purchase the compliance manager to go into more detail. So we will close out of this section. The next area that we're then going to come on to are going to be our related tasks. So you may have somebody that's going to be going through creating the process groups, starting the process maps, and they may want to either assign a task themselves. When they next log on, it's almost a reminder to them, or if they want to be assigning these tasks to somebody else within the organization, they can do that as well. So if we select on this first one that says overdue, select on the I button. At the moment it's saying responsible user, no responsible user, and that's purely because we actually removed that person that we'd assigned the task to from our portal. So if we now mark this as complete, select OK, it will then mark it as completed. So obviously it's just a nice way to tick off any associated or assigned tasks to any of the users. This one, however, we can see that it has been assigned. Again, that user would have been changed as well, and we're just going to mark this as complete as well. They can't be removed. So obviously once they have been created, they can't be removed off of here without using the close button on the far right hand corner. The next tab you're going to come along to is going to be related processes. So whilst this isn't a way of necessarily overlapping process maps within your organization, it is just a nice way to show relationships between certain areas of your business. It's also a nice way that if you are subject to a data breach or something along those types of lines, it's a nice way to go, okay, well, the breach has occurred at this stage in a process. What other processes does this have a relationship with that could also be dealing with this particular information as well? So it's a nice way to almost reverse engineer where a breach could have happened and where else the organization it could have impacted upon as well. To add a process, exactly the same way as you would be doing with the related legal requirements and controls, it'll bring you into this new screen here where we can just simply click on the plus button and it will add it under the related process header here. Like we can see sales, software sales in the EU has a relationship with the EEA. The next tab along is going to be our message board and the comments area that we looked at just a moment ago with the assets. This is an area that's going to keep track of any modifications again that have been made to a particular process. It will keep a timestamp date here, so we can see 5 days ago is when I made this action. It will show who's made the action and what has been changed. And also under here, very much like you could do with the assets, you can then add on additional comments to each other if you want to. We have additional editing functions here, so if you want to bullet point your points, if you want to bold something out, or even hyperlink something in here, you can do so with these additional options along the top. And finally, if you have a document or a file that you'd like to make it accessible to someone who could be working on this process map, that can also be drag and dropped into here. Essentially, it sees it as a file hosting area, so obviously it's not relying on what the file type is. It'll be a matter of the next person would then download it and then view it as it would do on their local machine. So you don't need to worry about it being a specific type of file that you're uploading. The last tab on here is going to be related assets. So if you recall back under the organization assets area, the related processes automatically populates itself as it will pick up straight away which processes that asset's being used in, and this is the vice versa or mirrored flip side to that as well. So the process under related assets will show which ones are being used within itself. So we can see here we're currently using 7 of our asset library within this process map. At the top here, just to move on before we actually continue into the process map itself, we have the ability to clone a process. This will carbon copy absolutely everything. This will copy the process map within it. It will create a copy of all of the related assets. What you may notice is it will add copy onto each of the assets and also the process, and it's just so you've got a clear indication which one's the original and which one is the copy that you made from the, say, for example, the software sales within the EEA. The next area along, like I said earlier, whatever you do on here, it's not set in stone for eternity. You can always select on edit here and it will take you back into that process. So you can maybe change its name over time. You might want to change any of the contact details. You'll then have an area where you can delete the process. You will have a confirmation page on here, but please be sure that this is something you definitely want to do, as we're unable to recover information if it's left too long after completing that action. And then finally, if you just want to close it off and pop back into the process group out of sight, you can do so using this button. The same as the organization assets area, there is another section where you can run a report against the process itself. So if we select on here, it'll give you all of the information such as the name of the process, who owns it, acting as, scope, purpose, etc. And again, this is just why we select a couple of the controls and clauses, just so it fills out this report and gives it a bit more flesh whilst we're doing these presentations. So below there, it will start breaking it down into a table format of which controls you're using, which clauses this has a relationship with within UK law or EU GDPR. We'll then have a list of processes this has a relationship, which tasks are currently assigned or which ones have been associated to this particular process, and then finally a list of the assets that are being used within the process map itself. As you may know, with all, or if not most of the modern browsers, using the print button here will give you the ability to simply export it into a digital format for PDFs. You don't have to keep printing everything, or alternatively you can print directly from your browser if you so wish to. So we're going to cancel out of here. The last two on here we'd already covered. So again, you've got that search functionality over here. And then finally, we've got the help tips section that we looked at earlier under the organization assets. So we're going to move on into the process map now. Like I mentioned, this is one that we've worked on before with a couple of customizations based on feedback that we received from a previous demo. So I'm just going to take a quick pause. If you've got any questions, pop them into the question area now, just so we can timestamp when certain questions come through and what they might be related to, and then we'll proceed. So we'll give it precisely 1 minute just to see if any questions come through, and if not, I'll then continue on with the screen. Thank you. Okay, I think that's been a minute, so we'll continue on now with our mapping screen that we're currently looking at. So the canvas that we have been working on up until now is a completely limitless space. So your process maps can scale as large as your business requirements desire or require. And obviously there's no limitation. If you do fall into a limitation, we do encourage you to let us know as quickly as possible so we can try and obviously correct that as soon as we possibly can. So to run across this top bar that we have in place is the toolbar. So on the far left-hand side, we just have some normal functionality. So we've got zoom in and zoom out, the ability to remove or duplicate certain points of the process, and then also our undo and redo functions. The undo memory has memory of up to 6 times. So if you do make a couple of errors, you can always revert back to an earlier point if you need to without having to create multiple saves or copies of the same process. These middle 4 icons here are essentially what you're going to be using to create the map. That includes the structure that you are seeing on the screen at the moment. And it also allows you to manipulate it over time to, again, grow with your business needs and to select individual aspects of the map to show what items you're going to be handling, where certain locations are, what records you're going to be storing. And these are all things that we're going to go through in a little bit more detail this afternoon. Finally, over here is what you're predominantly going to be using either right at the very beginning of accessing the map. So again, we've got that help button, which gives all users access to a user manual. This is interactive, built into the tool itself, but it can also be downloaded into a PDF document and shared with a potential new user that you're going to be introducing to the product. So we'll cancel out of here. And just to go back onto these two, you've got the view reports, the print icon that you'd have seen earlier throughout the demonstration. This allows you to view it live based on the information that you would have been creating on the process map. Alternatively, you can export this into a Word document to either make further modifications, maybe change your company logo, etc., depending on whatever your requirements are. So we're going to move over here into our asset library. Now we're just going to pin this open. It does have that functionality, so you can just keep referencing back to it very quickly. But obviously we are aware that some customers are going to be using this on a smaller laptop screen, so every bit of real screen real estate can be beneficial. So you can always just collapse it out of view like so. So at the top here, this is a section that was originally built into the tool, so you didn't have the organization assets library at the beginning. This was a new addition, so you can still add assets whilst you're going through mapping your process out at this late stage as well, so you don't have to keep reverting back in and out of the canvas that you're on the screen at the moment. So if we select on here, again, you've got all of the icons or the asset type. So if we wanted to add a new one, we simply click on call center, for example. It'll populate the screen like so. And then if we just collapsed out of here and close off here, we could select on it and then make all of the populated with the relevant information, such as the reference, what it's operating as, location, etc. And this screen will come into a bit more detail later on as well. So I'm just going to remove this. I'm just going to remove this one as well, as that doesn't need to be on screen, and it will just confirm the action has been confirmed. The next area below there is going to be your data subject or your data inputs. So if we select on here, it will populate an area with this plain grey arrow, and this just simply indicates new data entered into a process map. So with these, they can be manipulated using our move tool, so they can be popped anywhere you want to on screen. And then just to create the connections, we use the connection tool here, like so. We're using a data subject here just to be a little bit more specific on who our data subjects are, such as locations. And if we want to add any additional comments, we can also do that as well. Again, we'll come into this a little bit later on. And then that nicely segues us into adding in a new data subject. So whilst we can use them at the beginning of a process map to show more specific information on that person, we can also use them to illustrate the return of data to an individual further along in the process map if we want to. Below there, you'll have a quick search function. This just allows you to quickly work your way through your asset library. Obviously, over time, regardless of the size of the business, you actually come to find you have a lot more assets within your company than you think. And this is just a nice, quick and easy way for you to navigate your way through it. Below there, you'll then have a list of all of the currently used assets within the process map. So these are all of the ones in the light grey area at the top. And then below there, you'll have the rest of your library in the black area, just sitting there ready to be used if you need to. So we're going to collapse out of here, and we're going to walk you through our thought process behind the map that we've created today. So just to briefly explain or just give you an overview as to what the map's trying to illustrate, it's very, very loosely based on our business model as a company selling software. So what we're trying to show here is we have got new information coming in from a customer, and that is going to be illustrated here as to where the customers are. Again, we're going to go into these on a more granular level in just a moment. We've then shown a transfer of items going through our company's sales website, which is the online portal they're going to be making the purchase. That then moves through from our sales website to our billing team. They confirm the transaction's been completed, it's all okay, and then they pass that through to our central service center inbox, where we have a service center team working on this information. It's then going to be split off into 3 individual directions within our company. One is going to go to our fulfillment team. These 2 assets are based in France, and that's so we can illustrate cross-border processing. Our company server is based outside the EEA in Barbados, and it's just to show transfers to 3rd countries. And then finally below here we have our internal SharePoint system, and that is located on our customer location, Microsoft Azure Ireland. So we're now going to go through and show you how we started this section by working on this new link that we created just a second ago. So we use our hand tool, which has 2 functions. One is allowing us to do this with the canvas, so it's a drag and drop functionality, but more importantly, it allows you to select key elements of the process map for you to then start populating it with relevant information. Once you've selected the transfer at the beginning, you'll notice it's a grey dotted line, and that's just as a top level indication that it's new data, not existing data. And we'll open up a right-hand side panel over here. The first area we need to choose is who or what our data source is. So whether it's a data subject, so a person, or if it's a entity, maybe you're pulling information or gaining information from an external server system. Maybe it's a website you're pulling your information from. It's entirely up to you. If you select other, it will then ask you to populate this with the relevant information, just so you can accurately display where you're getting this information from. We're going to leave it as data subject, as we're going to keep all of these nice and simple as customer. You're then going to give it its reference. So if we just use customer A, for example, and that's just so you'll be able to see the modification once we've selected apply. We then choose the method in which this joins our organization. So we could say it's going to be data entry, or it's going to be internet. There's a long list here that you can choose from, but again, you've got that other option should you need it to then enter in something a little bit more specific to your organization. So we're going to leave this as internet as our standard method of information coming to us, and then we need to add on what data items are going to be sent through. So at the top here we have the lawful basis on which we're gathering the information. Next to here you'll have an I button. It just gives you the description to each one of the lawful bases that you're looking at. So we're just going to choose on here maybe legitimate interest, for example, and then below there you'll have exception, but exception is by default toggled off, and this will only become available to you when you start dealing with sensitive data items, if at all. Below there you'll then have a list of your data items. So if we just pick the top 3 or top 4, for example, again, these aren't going to be too accurate based on our scenario. But it's just obviously to show you how this works for this afternoon's training webinar. At the bottom here, you'll have another box. So again, it's going to work in the same way as you would use for the data source and the methods. So you can enter in here some additional data items that your business may be taking. Now, there is something we need to note here. While it is a limitless field that you can enter in as much information as you want, if, for example, we entered in here test and then separated it with test 1 and then separated it again with test 3, what will happen is when you then want to show those 3 data items separating within the business, the tool will see it as one item under other. So all of those 3 that you've entered into that field will then be carried across as other along the process map. If you want them to be illustrated separately, you simply create new data inputs, copy all of this information as you would have done before. However, under other this time, you then put test 1 and then another data input to show test 3. So that is how this functions at the moment, and it is something we are looking to build upon in the future. So just to make you aware of how to use that more effectively when you're trying to use your own custom data items. So we will leave these blank and turn off other. Below there, you've then got your sensitive data items. So again, if we choose any one of these, you'll then see exception becomes highlighted, and then you can start choosing what the exception actually is. Over here on the right-hand side, you can then specify who the data subject is. So whether it's a customer, whether they're complainants, inquires, etc. And then again, you've got that other field down the bottom here if you want to be a bit more specific on who the data subjects are. So what we're going to do is we're just going to select customers here. We're going to select OK. And at this stage, if we want to leave comments, we can do so. So as I mentioned earlier, comments will only be visible to the users of the tool itself. They're not published on any of the end reports, other than the fact that there will be a note to say there is a comment, but not necessarily what the comment is trying to display. Below there, you can also toggle on if there's any encryption taking place at this stage. So we could enter in here that yes, there is. And we'll say yes, it's a HTTPS. That's the level of encryption along this data entry point, as they're going to be making an online purchase. Once we select apply and we've got it, we can see that the name has been entered in here, so customer A. Obviously this would typically just remain as customer, but we just wanted to show you how it would work, just so we can differentiate it along here. You've then got the items in which you're, or how many items you're sending through into our company sales website. So we've got 4 on this transfer, we've got 22 on this one, and we've also got 1 on this one. We then select on our data subject. This is why we use it in this, and you don't have to use the data subject in this case. You can link all 3 of these data inputs directly to the sales website. But in this case, we wanted to be a bit more specific to say that actually this particular process is going to show the customer being located in Spain, as opposed to just the EEA in general. So again, all it'll ask you is the reference, the location of that particular subject, and then any additional comments, again, purely for internal use only, they do not show up on your reports. So we'll cancel out of here, and then we just need to show all of the information that's then going to transfer from this single entity of the data subject being the customer into our company sales website. So the method we've got here is going to be internet, and then we get to choose from our long list of items that we've been populating the tool with, so we can keep it nice and simple and just select all if we want to, or we can go through and just toggle the individual items as we go through the process map. Now at this point, if you choose to deselect or toggle off any of these options, they obviously then won't be available to you further along in the process map, so please bear that in mind when making your selections early on. So we're going to leave them all as select all, click OK, and then we've got again the option to add on comments and if there's data encryption at this point as well. So we'll select OK and we've got it. So we can now see that all 27 of these items traveling through our company sales website. I agree, it's a completely outrageous amount of information to take via an online sales portal, but that's just for today's demo. And then we're going to move on into how the company sales website looks after or deals with this information within our business. So selecting on the asset itself, all of this would have been pre-populated either under the organization assets field or during the process map itself using the asset plus icon over here. These can be changed over time if you want to, but again, as I mentioned earlier, any change you make to an asset is a global change. So not only will it update itself in this process map, it'll update it in pre-existing maps and also any map moving forward. So please do bear that in mind when making changes to your assets. So if we leave that as web application, we've then got its reference. So again, this is a mandatory field that you do have to fill in. We've then got what they're operating as. We've then got what their location within the organization. Any comments, if the data is encrypted at an asset level, not just along the transfer, that can also be toggled on. And finally, if there are any records to be stored on here. Obviously, with the sales website, it's simply the handshake to our billing team in this scenario, or it would just be a handshake to wherever that information is then going to be next. It's just essentially a front-end portal that a customer sees instead of just seeing a load of text or code. So we'll select apply on here, and we've got it. So as we go through, we can go through each one of these and update. Obviously, the earlier maps that we used beforehand only actually dealt with 6 data items, and we're just using 22 now just to show you the number of items you can actually have transfer along one transfer. So we'll select OK on here. We've got 27 now moving along in the map. That's going to go to our billing team. They're now going to confirm everything is all OK. And we're then going to move on to this last one. So I'm just going to rush through these. This is going to be very repetitive. And select apply, and then we finally end up at our service center. So again, we're still located in the UK with all of these stages so far, even though the customer's in Spain, and our report will pick up on that information for us as well. So we've just got this listed as an inbox. its reference service center. If there's any records that they store, they can also be added. We've then got what they're operating as, location, and again, if there's any data encryption at this stage as well. We're not adding any records at this point, as we do actually show you how to do that when we get to one of the later assets or the later points in the process map. So we'll select OK on here, and we can see that each time we click on these and make a modification, it will change it. So with this being an older map, these were originally seen as processes, which is why they're shown in purple. And then once they've been modified and to obviously reflect the more recent changes with the tool itself, once they've been saved again as a controller, you'll then see the icon will turn to green to show that we're in charge of that particular asset. So now we've got to our service center inbox. It's now going to prong off onto 3 different locations. The first one is going to be to our sales fulfillment team. So these are actually going to be based in France, and it's again just to illustrate that cross-border processing. So selecting on our fulfillment team, again, they are part of our organization and we actually control them. So we've got them listed as a controller. The location is France. If there's any data encryption, if there's any records, their reference, and then finally what you want the asset icon to look like as a top level view as well. So if we select OK on here, what you will notice here is we're only actually sending 3 data items. That's purely because within our company, we don't need to send all of these 27 items to the sales fulfillment team. They simply need things like a name. In fact, I can tell you what we've sent across to them. We've sent across an address, age, and bank details, but we can obviously modify this and change if we wanted to later on if your business requirements or your business setup changes. So if we select OK on here and hit apply, we can now see the changes to the 4 items that we've now selected from the list. Once we get to this stage, obviously we're going to send all 4 of these data items to our distributor. And then obviously that will then be the end of this particular process, and the distributor in this particular scenario, if we select it, is seen as a third party. Again, they're in France, as that's just going to be our main distribution base for EEA. So we'll select apply on here, and this will then return us back to this stage. We'll leave our internal SharePoint alone for now, but the area we're now going to look at is going to be this transfer here. The reason for that is this is going to now be moving from the UK to a third country, in this case the Bahamas, so you're going to have to start adding in additional context with this transfer itself. So we're just saying at this point, this is just going to be a backup of all of our data items that we've taken at the beginning of the process, and ultimately where it's going to be stored, and then any of the records that are going to be kept or retained on the particular asset, in this case the company server. So we're going to say there's a backup. We're going to say yes, we're keeping all of the 27 items we're dealing with. Any comments we can add, if there's data encryption, that's toggled on, and we can modify what this is going to be. So we can turn it off if we want to. Now, one thing you can't turn off and leave turned off is this section. If we set this to be unknown, it will immediately draw your attention to the transfer by turning it bright red with an exclamation point. And this is purely because you actually need to illustrate if you have appropriate safeguards in place, with it being a third country transfer, or if there's any derogations that apply. So if we select on appropriate safeguards, you'll then have additional drop-down context box where you can enter in some extra information such as standard data protection clauses, approved code of conduct, authorized contractual clauses, etc. So we're going to choose standard data protection clauses and hit apply. The last area of the map we're going to come to is our company server itself. So like I mentioned, it is based in the Bahamas, which is non-EEA. We're still keeping it as a controller, as it is still a controlled asset by ourselves, and it is controlling the information. It's not simply processing it on our behalf. We've got our reference here, so we can modify this if we want to. But again, if we change anything here, it will be a global change. And if we want to change the asset type as well, we can do so as well. So if we want this to now be a cloud application that just is stored over in the Bahamas, we can do so. But we're going to leave it as a server icon for now. Below there, you'll then have that same comments box and the data encryption, which in this case, we're saying, yes, the level of encryption on here is going to be BitLocker. So the last section on an asset that you can modify, which I've alluded to at this point, is going to be the records you're going to be storing on a particular area. So on our asset for the company server A, we will have a list of all the records it's going to be storing. Records are stored and kept to an asset itself. So meaning each time you come to use, in this case, company server A, regardless of which map you're using in that record, is going to be pulled through with it. A way around this is to create another asset, not a duplicate, because it will also copy the record itself. Create a new asset for the server, name it something ever so slightly differently so you can differentiate between the two, and then that way it will keep the records off of it. Another way to do it as well is to export this report into a Word document, and obviously just remove that line showing the record that you don't want to be illustrated on that particular report for that process. As I mentioned, you can't remove the records, but they can be edited at any given point. Simply select on Edit here. You can give it its name, so online sales transactions is the one we've chosen. You'll then have a list of all of your classifications. So we looked over this earlier under the settings menu. Again, this is why we would encourage people to populate that before going through and mapping their processes. So we'll have the 4 straight away, and then our 2 custom ones, sensitive and highly restrictive. You'll then be able to outline the format in which you're storing the information. So whether it's digital text, if it's, for example, a reception desk that's dealing with physical documents, they may be putting them into a filing system, so on and so forth. You've then got physical text, physical image, and so on down the bottom here. The next section below there is going to be the retention period of that record within your company. So how long are you storing it for? So on this section, we've left it as unknown. That is deliberate. It's not that we don't know how long we store our data for. It's purely so that when we come to our report, we can show you how it automatically picks up on undefined retention periods. And again, just the key element that you might have to go back into and modify further along the line using the organization tasks that we also touched on earlier as well. The last section on here is recipients. It's not a mandatory field. It doesn't have to be filled in, but you can enter in here who could come into contact with this record. So we've popped on here the IT manager as essentially the administrator for that particular asset within our business. So once you're happy with all of that, you simply hit save, and it will populate it over on the right hand side like so. There's no limit to the number of records that you can store on an asset, but again, like I said, you cannot remove them once they've been created. So we will hit apply, and okay, we've got it. So that is the creation of our process map, just to obviously outline the different areas that we are located within, different ways of showing the transfer of items, and obviously where we gather that information from. Just to cover off a couple more of these points on here, the move tool, typically we see people using this when they've created a basic map to begin with, but obviously over time as maps evolve, your business will evolve. You may want to free up a bit more space on larger maps in particular to add on additional assets or new connections between them. You can manipulate the entire map. The name of the assets will always clip the transfer line, so that is always clearly visible from the get-go. And you'll also notice that all of these items remain intact as well with regards to the transfer lines and also the data items that transfer along them as well. So once we're happy with all of this, we would always recommend using the save button before producing any reports. It's not mandatory. The inbuilt reporting system can run the report without having to create a save. The reason why we try and reiterate this is, with it being a cloud application, it is very dependent on a strong internet connection. So if you're working remotely at customer sites, if you're a consultant, or if you're even just working from home and your internet isn't as stable as what you'd be expecting at work, if there is a small drop in your connection, it could end up resulting in you losing the past 5-10 minutes worth of your work. So now that we've completed our process map, we're going to go into our report. So we're going to export it into a Word document just to show you that process and how quick and simple it is. So using the export button, it will show you what format it's going to go down into. So if you're using OpenOffice, if you're using Microsoft Office Word, .docx is a popular format that should be able to be visible in most readers. So we're going to open this up into Word, and it's just to mainly illustrate all of the different areas that you can modify within this. Obviously, with it being Word, you'll have a lot more editing options than you would do just by exporting into PDF, and then you've got to have additional rights to then modify that document as well. So at the top here, we've got the logo, which again, like I mentioned, we've seen some people wanting to modify, so they can do that. We will then have the, obviously what this is trying to illustrate, so the data flow audit process report. You'll have the issue date and the, the issue date. If you want to add in additional context, maybe you've got your own internal referencing system, that can be modified here. You'll then have essentially what the report is going to be doing for your business in regards to the GDPR. And then finally, the contact details down here like so. We've got a duplicate here because obviously this would have been something you would have had to have done at the beginning with regards to your data protection officer and also your representative. If we move over onto page 2, you'll then have your process overview. So you'll have the name of the process, the owner, the scope statement, purpose of process, and technical and organizational security measures, which again, this can all be modified even at this level of the report process. You'll then have an overall summary of what is contained within your process map itself. So we can see here the different types of lawful basis we're taking for our data items we're dealing with. So we've got contractual, consent, and legitimate. Obviously, they're not accurate, but it's just to show you how it would be displayed in the report. We've then got a note to mention if we are dealing with any sensitive data items. We're not in this case, and that yes, it does include cross-border processing, so that's the UK to France, and then that yes, it does include transfers to locations outside of the EEA. Below there is section 3, will be our map. Now the map itself can always be moved and moved into a separate page and put into landscape to make it a little bit more readable. It does scale quite well, but obviously as you can appreciate with larger maps, that's something you are going to have to modify post creation, if that makes sense. Below there, you're then going to have a list of your personal data inventory. A lot of this is going to look like jargon and not anything you'd really take, but it's just to show you what the report will look like, regardless of the amount of information you're trying to feed into it. So again, you've got that basic summary letting you know of the personal data items that you're dealing with, what lawful basis you're taking them on, and if there is sensitive items. The table will then break it down to the item, subject, lawful basis, and exceptions. Below there, we'll then have our data subject. So again, with this being a Word document, you can always move these around so it formats correctly when you come to print it as well. So under here, it will just outline the data subject as a natural person who can be identified directly or indirectly by reference to an identifier or factors specific to that person. So in this case, we were using the data subject just to simply be more specific on their location. But again, if you use them to illustrate the return of data, you can then use it in that same context as well. The next section is section 6, and this is your asset register. So this will obviously just give you a list of all of the areas of the business, all of the assets that are being used within this process map. So we've got a list of the asset, their location, what they're operating as, if there's any encryption on a particular asset. So if we actually go over to our company server up here, you've got yes, BitLocker, and then finally we've got any records that are stored on an asset as well. So we've got our online sales transactions just here, and then we finally have this last column, which is going to show any existing comments on a particular area of the map. So this is not only visible on the asset level, it's visible on the data items and also on the data subjects. But again, it will only make a reference that there is a comment, not what the comment is. You can always move this column if you don't want it visible when you actually come to export the end report. Section 7 is a list of your records. Ours is very simple for the time being. We only have the one record. At the top here, under the summary, it will show that all of our records have an undefined retention period. And as you can imagine, this will be changed if we had maybe 10 records. It would say maybe 1 or 2 have an undefined retention period, outlined by the not selected underneath the retention period column. It will then mark here the classification of all of our records as sensitive. And again, if we had 8 or 10 different records, again, with different types of classifications, it will then break them down into those sections as well. Below here, now this is going to be an area that you might want to customize if you are dealing with 27 items on one particular transfer with regards to the formatting. So if we just move this all down, apologies for that. We've then got a transfers and the mechanisms by which data items are passed from one asset to each. So the first section we're going to come to is method. So how it's being transferred, the data source, the data items, where they're coming from and where they're going to within our business, the encryption, the third country transfer information, and comments. So if we scroll down to the one that's going from essentially it's the backup going from our service center to our company server over in the Bahamas, you'll then be able to see under that column you'll have safeguard standard data protection clauses apply. And that takes you right through to the end of the report itself. Like I mentioned, the ability to put it into a Word document allows you to remove certain areas of the report you do not wish to have visible, and also to format it to how you want it to be viewed as well. So we will exit out of this section. No, we don't wish to save. Just minimize here, and that will return us back to this page itself. So that brings me to the end of the training webinar. We'll just ensure that we have no more slides to go through, so bear with me just 2 seconds. So just to recap, we've gone through creating a process. We've then gone through and obviously created it and the final outcome with regards to the report that it's going to be able to produce. And I now open up the floor to questions. We've got another 15 minutes until the webinar is due to finish. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to pop them into the questions area or the chat box, and I'll do my best to answer them whilst we're on the webinar. And if I can't answer them, I'll come back to you on a one-to-one basis later on this afternoon. Again, thank you very much for your time. I will pop myself on mute, and obviously if I've got any questions, I can always answer in the chat box or just unmute myself. But again, thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to speaking to you all very shortly. Thank you.